listening to The Tenderness Revolution, a podcast about the stories of kindness, compassion, and empathy that play out in our lives, because these deeply moving experiences describe what it means to be human and invite us into a new way of thinking about the world and each other. I'm your host, writer and journalist Yvonne Gavin. And every episode, I'll be asking a new interviewee about a pivotal moment of tenderness that helped shape the course of their life. I'm here today with Dr Omar Reda, an author and consultant psychiatrist who has devoted much of his career to helping people recover from psychological trauma caused during the Libyan war, and has said that he loves working on the front lines, taking care of the voiceless, the forgotten, and those living in the shadows and on the margins of society. Yet he also acknowledges the multitude of more subtle ways that trauma can show up in our lives. In his book, Untangled, he explores the impact that trauma can have on children and their families, while emphasising the capacity that we all have to heal from even extreme adversity through shared courage and compassion. Dr. Omar moved from Libya to the United States in 2002 and currently lives in Oregon with his wife and their 3 daughters, where he works as a psychiatrist for the non-profit Providence Health system. Omar, thank you so much for being on the podcast today. I'm really looking forward to our conversation.
Thank you, Yvonne. It's my pleasure.
So I wanted to start off by asking you to share your moment of tenderness with us. So the idea behind the Tenderness Revolution podcast is that essentially our lives are made up of all these little stories that are stitched together. And when we shine a light on scenes where we felt a profound sense of connection to something bigger than ourselves, moments where we felt seen or understood, or that we had a deeper relationship to the world around us, it's as though we're awakened to greater meaning and purpose. I'd really love to hear your moment of tenderness, Omar.
And thank you very much. That's very powerful. I think the world needs more and more of these moments. I have many, and I think most of them, they stem to come from traumatic experiences. So I see my trauma story as a privilege, and I try to use it as a tool for healing myself and everybody around me. So my encounters with trauma started at a very, very early age. I was only 6 years old, and my sister was 14. And she went blind, and then she quickly lost her life to brain cancer. So she was the reason why I wanted to become a physician. So I always fantasized about becoming a brain surgeon, and I did very well in medical school. But then, every time I go to the operating room, I end up fainting on the floor. So they told me I cannot be a good neurosurgeon if I am always unconscious. So I wanted to do something with the brain. I found my passion in psychiatry.
Wow. Oh my gosh, Omar, what a story, and what a thing to go through as a child. Did you have any other siblings? Was it just you and your sister growing up?
Yeah, we come from a large family, so we were 12 siblings, but then we lost one sister, and then we lost a brother. So now we are 10, and I am the middle child.
Wow. Oh my goodness. That must have been so unbelievably traumatic to experience that as a child. And I can imagine it must have just been so confusing for you to kind of try and understand, like, how can this happen to my sister, and what's happening with her? Why is she unwell? And someone who is your sibling and your peer, I would imagine it would really shake you to the core and sort of make you really sort of doubt, I don't know, what it means to be alive, and also doubt your safety and wonder, is the same thing going to happen to you? Did any of those things go through your mind?
Yeah, you struggle with big questions as a young child, especially when you see the adults around you having big emotions. So my mom and dad were completely heartbroken. They ended up taking my sister to the United Kingdom, but unfortunately, the cancer was too advanced to save her life. So I just had the questions like, how come children get hurt when they're very young? They haven't seen anything yet. And then mom and dad were extremely emotionally available, so they helped me process some of my trauma. But of course, things are never the same when you lose a loved one.
Gosh, absolutely. It's so hard to grapple with why and how to experience loss at that age. It's completely life-changing, and obviously it's shaped you. It's completely shaped who you are today. Almost as though you're sort of trying to answer those questions in the work that you do now, and you've been trying to answer them ever since.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I had multiple encounters after that age. I mean, when I was 11, I was just coming back home from school. And, in the 1980s, like Libya, parents, they did not educate their children that, encounters with adults can be very dangerous or even deadly. So this guy, he stopped his car and he pretended to ask for directions. So I thought nothing of it. And I went to the car and I found him to be naked from the waist and down. And he tried to kidnap me.
Oh
But
dear.
I was very lucky to run away and hide behind bushes. And I was watching him until he gave up and, took off. But that ignited a passion in me about protecting children, especially from sexual trauma.
Gosh, it's so powerful that you had these really traumatic experiences and then you've used them to kind of fuel your, the passion that you now have in the work that you do. There's so much that I want to ask you about. I think the work that you do is absolutely, well, it's essential, and it's absolutely incredible. You've obviously touched so many lives. I've been reading your book Untangled, and I think it's written with so much tenderness, actually. And there are so many moments in it where it's almost like you feel comforted and relieved. The way that you describe hope, it seems to be a big part of the book, this sense that no matter how traumatic the experience, there's always hope that you can heal from that experience through compassion and through empathy. I see that a lot of the work you do is around this parent-child relationship, which seems to be central to everything. And in the book, you say of parents, we nourish so they can flourish. And that's a really beautiful phrase. But one of the things that I did wonder in reading that was what happens actually if the parents aren't able to nourish their child because they're distracted or they're struggling with things in their own life. Maybe they're even dealing with anxiety or depression. Does their inability to be there emotionally for their child, does that cause a type of trauma in the child?
Yeah, I mean, being a psychiatrist, even though I am an adult psychiatrist, I love and enjoy working with children. This came from life experiences, just going through the immigration journey, being an asylum seeker and a refugee, and then eventually working with asylum seekers and refugees in different parts of the world. But, there are things that I see commonly that are very, very important for us as humans. One is hope, another one is faith. And usually, if we lose both faith and hope, some people will give up on life, and we see people engaging in self destructive or even, unfortunately, suicidal behaviors. But big thing in the family context is love. And love does not only mean a superficial, tenderness with the people around you, but, I came up with love stands for listening. So deep listening with the desire to understand. And then O stands for options. So not everything that I think is the right thing for my children might be the right thing for them. And then V is validation. I validate their experience even if I don't agree with it. and eventually E for empowerment. So I see my children as part of the solution, not only as part of the problem. And there is no bad parent. I think all parents are trying their best given their circumstances. Many of us, we run on empty tanks and we try to nurse our own wounds while taking care of the wounds of others. And, maybe we don't have enough tools or the necessary skills. So I try to look at parents with compassion too, because, there is that sense of attachment that maybe they were never given when they were children. And it's very difficult to give something that you have not received. But I believe that with self-discipline and with active investment and being deliberate parent, you can eventually find the room for compassion for your own needs, but also for the needs of your loved.
Well, that's such a beautiful an acronym. I love the way that you made that love an acronym, and I also really appreciate you saying that there's no such thing as a bad parent, because I think there is actually quite a divisive approach to parenting these days. And I think a lot of people tend to sift parents into good and bad. And there's a lot of judgment that's inflicted on parents. And I actually agree with you. I think you're completely right. I really do believe that everyone in life is just generally trying their best. And even if their behavior is destructive, I think it's because of unconscious drives. I don't think that people consciously try to do bad things. And that's why I think that this whole standpoint of trauma is very important, and it's fascinating, and I think it needs to be shared. I don't know if you're aware of the work of Gabor Mate. Yeah, so
The wisdom of trauma.
yeah, so I'm really interested in the way he describes this new view of trauma, and it's actually really fascinating. So he describes it as something that can be healed, but he seems to be kind of widening the net of what can be considered traumatic or a trauma. So he says it's not just caused by what we might consider to be sort of disastrous events. He says trauma isn't what happened to you, it's what happened inside of you, as in what it meant to you. And it can also be what doesn't happen to you and what should have happened to you, such as when your essential human needs weren't met. Now, that's really fascinating, because I think also there can be a certain sense of sifting people into, well, this was a really bad thing that you went through, so you're allowed to really struggle, whereas this thing wasn't quite as bad. Could you talk for us a bit about trauma and how it's perceived and what constitutes trauma?
Yeah, I mean, it is a big field, as you know, the field of psychological trauma and emotional wounds. But trauma in Greek means wound, and to be wounded does not have to mean you are broken, should not carry any judgment. All of us are wounded in one way or another, as you're aware of the, adverse childhood experiences study that people are most likely have been traumatized multiple times when they were children. So it is like a scale of 0 to 10, how many times you're traumatized by number of traumatic experiences before the age of 18. And this includes like physical abuse and sexual abuse, and emotional abuse, physical and emotional neglect, and also like domestic violence, divorce of parents, substance abuse of parents, incarceration, and mental illness of a caregiver. So they found out the higher the score, the most likely the negative impact. But that's not, a linear relationship, because some children, maybe they get traumatized by they have an adult caregiver that will take care of them. There are other children, maybe they were traumatized with quote unquote a small incident, but they went through it alone. And being alone during a traumatic experience is a very lonely experience. And it's something that's unfair for a child to try to figure out on their own. And children, they have the firm belief, the core beliefs that we have, that the world is a safe place and adults should be trusted with my needs. So when the world is no longer safe, or if the adults are the predators, then this can be very confusing to the psyche. So I agree with you. Wound, is not something that's most of the time visible. We deal with many, many invisible wounds. And most of our PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder, is not necessarily mental illness. It's more a moral distress. It affects our deep soul and our ethical and existential, existence.
Gosh, that's fascinating. So, when you say that PTSD is more of a sort of existential experience, can you talk a bit more about that?
Yeah, I mean, we notice that if people are affected by natural disaster, and including the global pandemic right now, people tend to recover from that quicker than if the trauma is caused by another human. So man-made and interpersonal violence is
Okay.
something that will affect my psyche and my deep soul very deeply, because it will affect my core beliefs of goodness of others, and that a human should not hurt other humans. So for example, we found out if you have been physically tortured, or if you have been sexually violated, these are very intimate, experiences, because somebody touched me without my permission.
Mm.
And most of the time, I will take this experience and internalize it and say there is something fundamentally wrong with me. I might hate
Right.
my body. I might actually start to engage in self harm because
Mm.
I wanted to undo the damage that was done to me.
So there's that element of sort of self-blame, or in trying to find an answer or an explanation for why did this happen. It's often the case that the mind will reach for a sense of, well, there must be something bad about me, or there must be something wrong with me for this to have happened to me. Is
Yeah,
that
I
right?
mean, remember also most of the abusers, they will try to insert that thought in your mind. They will
Right.
say, this is a topic that's taboo, especially if it's in the context of incest, or if somebody that's familiar to the family is the abuser or the predator.
Mm.
There will be lots of silence in the room, and the children will keep the secret. And most of the time, they will have somatic symptoms. They might have behavioral symptoms. It will affect their body. Like Dr. Basil van der Kolk, he wrote a book called "The Body Keeps the Score," because the trauma lives in the body, but it also lives in the psyche, lives in the heart, and lives in the soul. So that's why very important. I really, really try to work with the trauma survivors on challenging these negative thoughts and try to reframe what happens to them.
Yes, absolutely. I think that that thing of working with the family is just, it's everything. And like you said, that's how you stop the cycle of trauma from being repeated through generations. How exactly does that happen? How do cycles of trauma repeat through families over generations?
Yeah, I mean, I can use my own example. So I was working as an emergency room physician in Benghazi, Libya, my hometown. And then in the year 1999, the Libyan government decided to place my name on their blacklist. So I had to leave the country because of my humanitarian activities. And I took a boat across the Mediterranean Sea to the United Kingdom. So I ended up going through the asylum seeking. And eventually my asylum was denied in Great Britain, because the immigration judge, he said, Omar, I cannot see any evidence of physical torture on your body. And I said, Your Honor, you failed to see the scars on my mind and the wounds in my soul. And these are invisible wounds that we carry as trauma survivors. But then, I ended up coming to the United States after meeting my wife, who's a Libyan American, and then going through, the training in psychiatry, then finding out that my home country, Libya, went through a bloody civil war, that I flew back and forth to Libya multiple times, leaving my wife and very tiny children behind, because I have other family to take care of. And I have millions of people who can use my expertise.
Mm,
Um, but every time I come back to America, I find my children to be extremely anxious. And
mm,
I had an option. I have a choice to make. I can care about every child in the world and forget my own, or I can try to help both. So I started to learn about play therapy and art therapy, and start to work with my children on family bonding. And we created together the daughter-father bonding project. It's a whole, YouTube channel. This is how I want to break the cycle for them. I wanted them to have a emotionally available and safe parents.
oh my gosh, that's such an incredible story, Omar. I can't believe that you went all the way across the Mediterranean on a boat. It must have been so terrifying and then humiliating as well to go through that experience of having your asylum rejected. And it's so interesting to hear about your relationship with your daughters. And I really do relate to that because as a parent, I feel like we're always pulled in so many directions. And there's this constant, deep desire to connect with our children and to be there for them, whilst also being who we are, in a wider context as well, and using our talents and our gifts, in a wider context outside of the family. And there's always this tension, I think, between balancing the two. What kind of things make up the father daughter? What did you say it was, bonding project?
I mean, there should be no tension really between our professional and our personal needs. I think the more we blossom personally, the more we blossom professionally too. So it's very important to find that balance. And I don't spend all of my energy on my patients or outside the house. And then I come to my family and only have the leftovers for them. This is unfair.
Mm,
And I should have something remaining in me and to
mm,
have my own needs met too. So we need to practice self-care and self-compassion because, if I am not available for them, I will be most likely irritable. And many times I see it when I'm having difficult time at the hospital, or if I'm on call after a very long and difficult night. I might not be emotionally available or kind towards my loved ones. So it's very important that we pay attention to our needs and take care of our needs. We deserve to have personal time, but parenting should not be a burden. So we should not be around each other with lots of tension. Our loved ones should not walk around us like they are walking on eggshells.
mm,
um, we need to be relaxed around one another because there is difference between a house and a home. A home becomes a home only because of the family dynamics between family members. So it's very important that I think the most lucky parent is the one who their children feel safe when they enter the house, and
mm,
the unfortunate one is the one whose family will breathe better when they exit the house. And I
mm,
call that, losing the American dream, chasing it. So we
mm,
have something here in America we call the American dream, which is
mhm.
you come to this country and it's the land of opportunity, and you try to work long hours and chase materialistic needs of your children. But remember, they have emotional needs too. If
Mm.
my children go to bed with full stomach and empty heart, then I have lost the American dream, because the dream is our families.
Oh, absolutely. And that makes me wonder about the fact that, and as Dr. Gabor Mate says, we're a traumatized world. And he says one of the reasons for this is because attachment and connection are not prioritized in our society. So, for example, in the US, he cites the fact that, paid maternity leave as such doesn't really exist. And basic human needs are not being met. So he says, therefore, we're creating traumatized adults. So do you think it always comes back to this thing of attachment and connection in early life?
Yeah, I think it's very important to have a human connection. I think it's the solution to most of our relational wounds, is to heal relationally too. So we can do that even as families or as communities. What we see now as hate and discrimination and racism, many times there is lots of room for healing if we, our children and our women, usually women activities are very healing. If they sit together and they work through our perceived differences and try to see the divine in each other, because we offer each other lots of beauty. If I, dismiss someone because they have a different background, I'm going to miss a lot on their beauty that they can offer me personally. So I agree with you. I mean, attachment is something that we can do not only as children, but also as adults. I think it's never late to attach. Better late than never.
Oh, absolutely. And there's always that underscore of hope in your work, which is what I really love about it. But it does seem as though, in terms of a wider issue, it does seem that, our political and social systems, especially in the West, they just don't really support fundamental human needs of attachment. All the emphasis is on consumerism and work. Do you think that that's causing this traumatized society that we live in? And maybe more than that, it's preventing us from really seeing the trauma in each other and then being able to address that and work with it.
Yeah, I love that. I wish if we can see the trauma in each other and treat one another with tenderness, that will be a wonderful world that we can live in. But you bring 2 points. One is my work with my colleagues. Many of them I call wounded healers, and it's actually the title of my new book coming up in February of 2022. The wounded healer. I see many of my colleagues. They dismiss their needs because there is somebody else who's relying on them, and many of them they are quite overwhelmed with the lack of a human connection and treating our patients as a check boxes, and many times with the pressure of the electronic medical records. Many times I'm talking to the computer more than I talk to the human. So I miss a lot on listening to the trauma story of my clients. At the same time, as a caregiver, I'm overwhelmed with the amount of paperwork that I don't tend to my needs, and I might become irritable with my loved ones, or I might sort to, numb my trauma through substance use or even self-destructive behaviors. So this is one. The other one is the impact of this dynamic on the children. And if something as big as the global pandemic did not wake us up, I don't know what it will take. So right
Mm.
now there is lots of focus on trying to catch up academically. Our children have to go back to school as soon as possible, and let us just stuff all of this information in their young traumatized minds. I'm a big fan of social and emotional learning right now. I want really every school to practice art and play and give children safe spaces so they can try to process this huge trauma. Emotional expression is something we need to make permissible for our children. So I want lots of compassion from the parents and the students and also the teachers when it comes to the next academic year.
Oh my gosh, I'm so glad you brought up this subject of homeschooling and how much anxiety there is around it following the pandemic, as though going through a global pandemic, wasn't kind of confusing and discombobulating enough, having to manage homeschooling. And I think for me, and I'm sure I'm speaking for many other parents, that the hardest part of homeschooling is the guilt that you're not doing what you're supposed to be doing and that your children are missing out and that they're falling behind and it's all your fault. And that feeling is the hardest feeling. And I have noticed that feeling in myself. I'm actually homeschooling right now. We're still in term here. We've only got a few days left because we're in the Southern Hemisphere here. And the schools have been closed now for a few weeks. And I notice it kind of ignites this anger in me because I feel guilty for not managing to facilitate the homeschooling as I would like. Plus, my daughter, who's 8, has a lot of resistance to homeschooling. She just wants to play because she's at home. So she's like, well, I'm at home. So home is a place where I relax and play. I'm just going to relax and play. So we have this difficult dynamic. And I acknowledge that I want to be more flexible and just explore that willing, that kind of energy to play and have fun and let's be creative. But then I feel this pressure and this guilt. And then I also feel pressure to do my own work. And then I often end up just feeling angry. And it's not a good dynamic at all.
Yeah, I mean, the whole system is like designed to crush the human spirit. I mean, crush the creativity that we have as adults and as children. So I would say if something, seems toxic to you or dysfunctional, and don't take it as the norm. I mean, it's okay to revolt against the status quo that's quite toxic to the relationship that you have with your loved ones. Their mental health is more important than, anything for me, at least. I care about their emotional health because many people, they will judge their character, they will assassinate their character. If I can be on their corner, thinking the best about them and giving my best to them, that will be really, really wonderful. I would say like the grief and loss that we went through the last 18 months has really exacerbated many things that predated the global pandemic. We all have been traumatized heavily. We all are wounded healers. Some of us are walking wounded. We have deep wounds, and some of us are visibly bleeding. And we try not to see each other trauma. If I am bleeding in front of you from a wound in my leg, everybody will rush me to the emergency room. But people are bleeding emotionally, and we tell them, no, no, this is only in your head. Suck it up and be strong, and all of these negative, societal taboos. So I would say when it comes to loss and grief, I have learned something from working with a palliative care team. So working with people at the end of their life, we can do three things. One is to focus on the quality of the relationship we have with our loved one. Even if we don't have enough quantity, even if I'm working long hours, I'm a very busy parent. Whenever I am with my child, I should be with my child. The amount and the quality of the relationship really, really matters. The second thing is to not parent out of guilt. So we tried our best given the circumstances. I cannot undo the damage that was done yesterday. I can only strive to make today and tomorrow better than yesterday. And the third thing is to practice self-care and self-compassion. I cannot care for others if I forget my needs.
That's really wonderful. Thank you so much for spelling out those 3 steps that we can go through, or 3 things that we can remember. Could you just go over those 3 just briefly one more time? Because I think that was so helpful, and I think that could really be of use to so many listeners when they're sort of maybe struggling with their relationships, especially in this post-pandemic. Well, we're still kind of coming through it, but in this strange pandemic era that we're in.
Yeah, I mean, I would talk from personal experience. So, because of the war in Libya, as you know, it was a civil conflict. Unfortunately, there are people who took sides, for or against the new revolution, for or against Mr. Gaddafi. So some of my family members, they took sides too. But I focus on the quality of the relationship I have with all of my siblings because I was out of the country at the time. I see wounds on both sides, and both of them are my siblings, and I love them dearly. So I needed to focus on the quality of the relationship. Some of them I don't see. I haven't seen one of my children since 1999 because he's not allowed back in Libya because of his political affiliation. So I would love to see him one day in Egypt. It has been 22 years. But there are other ways I can honor that relationship. We can see each other through electronic, platforms, and maybe I can support him emotionally because he's alone. The rest of the family is inside Libya. So this is one way we can do it, focusing on the quality, even if we don't have the quantity.
The
Another thing
quality,
is
yeah.
to,
Mm-hmm.
yeah, another one is really not to parent or be a caregiver out of guilt only. Everybody will judge us as parents. Everybody will show our negative traits and tell us what's wrong with us. We seem to not focus much on the positive, even though most of the time we are engaging in positive behavior. So maybe we'll be more generous with the praise and with the positive feedback. And eventually, don't forget your needs. Make sure that from time to time you have to pause and fill your emotional tank, because even cars and machines, they need maintenance and they need breaks from time to time.
Absolutely. So quality, the self-care part, and the second one was
Not
not
working these
guilt.
out of guilt. Yeah.
Yeah, not responding to your child out of guilt. I think those 3 points are so helpful and will really be of use to so many parents and also people in all their relationships, in their sibling relationships, in their parental relationships with their parents and with their spouses as well.
Yeah,
One
absolutely.
thing, yeah, and one thing you mentioned that really interested me was this sense that when things go wrong, I was reading about this in your book, that often in families there's a sense, if there's a trauma, that we hide it. And it also comes into what you were saying in relation to the wounded. You know, people are walking around wounded, but we hide it, or we don't want to see it. What is that? Why is there so much kind of secrecy or hiding away the difficult parts of ourselves? Why do we find it so hard to admit when things are difficult and to willingly see the difficulties in others?
Yeah, I mean, it comes from many places. Most of them, they have to do with the way we were brought up. So many families, they don't value emotional expression. They will tell you, big boys don't cry, and children are supposed to only be seen, not to be heard. So we learn how to, suck it up and really be silent when it comes to our suffering. So this is very unfair when our children, I ask a group of children, like, what's your favorite animal? And one of them, he said, I wanted to be a fish. And I said, why? He said, because when fish cry, nobody notice, you
Oh,
know. So some of our children, we can use play and art therapy and find out deep issues that they are struggling with. And if we don't really sit with our children, somebody else will sit with them. If we don't give them the answers, they'll find the answer somewhere else. So the culture of secrecy might be coming from the family culture. It can be coming from, the environment that we are raised. Many of us, we want to do it on our own. We think we are strong and independent, and this is usually we see that in the Western culture. When it comes to somebody from my culture, for example, from the Muslim or Arabic faith, we don't want to be a burden on our family. So we continue to suffer in silence because I don't want to hurt other people with my own pain, which is another, dysfunctional trait, because I will take care of everybody else and I will listen to everybody else trauma story. But when it comes to my own wounds, I am not going to open up to anyone. And really, we try to say, I don't want to be a burden. But if you are always silent and spacey and distant, if you are isolating and hiding away from your family, this is a bigger burden for them. So maybe if you share a little bit of the load that you have on your shoulder, it will actually lighten the load on everybody in the family. It will make the family, environment more healthy. Another thing I see maybe from the religion, and it's maybe a misinterpretation actually of a sacred text. Because, like, in Islam, for example, God is very clear about emotional expression. There is a whole story about Mary, the mother of Jesus, peace be upon him. And when she was going through difficult time while she was pregnant with Jesus, and God gave her every single description of what can she do to cope with the postpartum depression she was struggling with. He gave her directions that she should not dwell on negative thoughts, that she should eat healthy, drink lots of water, she should have sleep hygiene, not engage in people who wanted to engage her in negative thoughts. And, the company that we have can affect us. He, pointed her to do a little bit of physical exercise. So all of these are very clear in most of the sacred text and the different, religions. But unfortunately, humans have misinterpreted many of the sacred texts, and for our different agendas. Some of us, we want to get more fame, or we want to cause, people to hate each other, and we want to cause division. And so most of the time I see culture and religion are blamed for dysfunctions that happen in the family context, when in reality many times it is just a misinterpretation.
That's so interesting. I've heard a definition of trauma as that it's essentially a separation of the mind and the body and the emotions. How does this separation occur, and how can we prevent it from happening in ourselves?
Yeah, thank you. I mean, the DSM-5, which is like the Bible of psychiatry, uh, talks about the definition of PTSD, and one of the criteria is dissociation. So we dissociate when we are going through difficult or traumatic experience. I see that commonly with the survivors of sexual trauma, especially if the sexual violation happened in a family context, if there is incest, or if the sexual predator is somebody that we know. So the child, because the experience is too traumatic for them, their mind will subconsciously dissociate, and the body will be going through the experience alone, while I will be watching what happens to me as if I'm watching a movie. And
Wow.
and unfortunately, that's a very difficult experience that needs integration in the future. And integration happens not necessarily by listening to every single painful, traumatic, graphic detail of what happens to me, but trying to make meaning out of it, and trying to find how did I survive the worst, what did I learn from my experience, the human resilience, and finding even beauty in what happened to me throughout the years. I mean, I had been through lots of trauma, but I will never change anything about my trauma story. It made me a better human.
I think that's one of the most powerful and beautiful things that you do in the way you talk about trauma. There's a section in your book, Untangled, where you describe a traumatized family as a family that can heal and then come through the trauma as a stronger family as a result of it. And I think that's such a incredibly beautiful and almost an alternative narrative, because I think there is this sense often that when there has been trauma, it's as though something has been tarnished or damaged in an irreparable way. And there's a sense that if we could erase that event, if we could remove it as though it had never happened, then we would obviously do that. But the way you put it, it's almost as though it reminds me of there's a something in Japanese culture where um, Japanese bowls are repaired with gold. And afterwards, they're actually more beautiful and more valuable because of the cracks and the repairs in the cracks. And it makes me, the way you describe traumatized families and the way they can heal, it reminds me of that image. Can you talk to us a bit more about how families can do that, and individuals, how they can go about healing and repairing and actually integrating the trauma in a way that actually makes them a fuller, stronger version of themselves?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm sure you are aware of Rumi. Rumi very eloquently said, there are beautiful things you can only see in the dark, which means, in the dark, we can see like the beautiful full moon, we can see shining stars, we can see fireworks, we can see beautiful things, but he also means when it comes to the darkness of our trauma, we should find like meaning and find healing and even try to find beauty in what happens to us. And I think if we just maybe try to adapt that frame of mind, if something bad happened to me, and we don't have to assign bad or good to what happens to us, because this is really what caused the trauma to be traumatic. It's not the event, it's my interpretation of what happens to me. So I will find a meaning of what happens first. So this is the first step. I will say something happened to my family, and let me try to find meaning out of it, and then practice lots of self-compassion. And sometimes, that might mean we need to open up about what happens to us to our children, not necessarily to scare them, but to prepare them, not necessarily to share graphic details, but to share empowering ones. So it's very important to be a more open parent and open, channels of communication and build bridges of trust that maybe they are not built before. That's why, even when my children were going through their anxiety after me going back and forth to Libya, I had to do something to bond and to repair the damage that happened in the relationship. And that meant, maybe I need to practice safe touch and uh, eye contact, and maybe we can smile more towards each other. Maybe we can listen to each other more deeply, and I don't have to be the one always talking. And maybe I can even apologize if I cause any repair in the relationship. If there is any damage, if there is any rupture, I need to immediately try to repair it, because this is what we do as a family. So there are lots of things that maybe starting with safety. The first thing is foundation of safety, and then building trust so we can start to listen to one another with compassion. And eventually, if everybody shares their side of the story, we will find lots of communality. And rather than seeing each other as enemies, I think we will become a stronger family that way.
That's so. Oh, that's such a beautiful description of how parents and children can relate to each other, and there's so many parts to it that really fascinate me. I think firstly, listening, deep listening, which, as you said, it's so important that we really listen to our children, and also this the sense of stories and how powerful they are, sharing, as I'm trying to do on this podcast, moments of kindness and compassion and empathy, and really telling those stories and emphasizing those. I think self-compassion is a really big one, and it seems as though it's a way of healing trauma. And I think it's a fairly new concept and way of experiencing ourselves. It seems as though so many of us tend to quite instinctively blame ourselves or harshly judge ourselves when things go wrong, whatever the thing is. And also, if we do experience some level of trauma, it can be very difficult for us to give ourselves a break or speak to ourselves kindly. Often our internalized voices can be quite harsh. And I think there's a sense that that's how it should be, or that's normal. And if you don't have that voice, then you will never actually achieve anything in life. But I think probably the opposite is true. Can you speak about self-compassion and the power that it has to heal?
Yeah, I mean, you talk very beautifully about the inner critic inside of us. We try to, be the center of the universe, and everybody will rely on us, and we see ourselves as failure if we just cause one mistake. Even if we save thousands of lives, if I lose one life, I see myself as a failure. So it's very important that we see our emotional needs and not as a cliche. Some of us, we say this is a fluffy material. We don't talk about emotions. These are very soft things that we, as caregivers, we cannot show any vulnerability, and I need to always be strong for everybody around of me. But really, self-compassion and self-care, I think if we see it as a responsibility rather than a luxury, many of us, we think it's just luxury that I cannot afford. But if there are thousands of people that I'm holding on my shoulders, and I am the foundation of my community and my family, and I'm the glue that holds everything together, it's only fair that I practice self-care, because if I crumble, everybody else will crash with me. So seeing self-care and self-compassion as a responsibility rather than as a luxury is very important. And then actually engaging in concrete ways to try to practice self-care, because many of us, we do self-care when we take time off. Most of the time we don't feel good after coming back from our vacation. We feel as tired as before the vacation, and I believe that's because during our time off we only take care of our body, but we remember the human is made of body, but also psyche or mind, also heart or emotions and deep soul. And our soul is what causes our, trouble with the PTSD, and try to process all of these trauma that happens to our people is a very, very deep wound that usually affects our morality very deeply. So I try to come with concrete actions, how to take care of your body, which is wonderful. You can do that in isolation, but you can also do it as a community. Maybe we hold each other accountable for being kind towards one another and towards ourselves. So that's one thing we can do. Another thing is to really try to maybe come up with concrete things for our psyche. So not talking negatively about ourselves, not engaging in self-loathing, trying to challenge and change any negative self-talk, talking nicely to our heart, like having a community of care, having a social support network, and talking nicely to our soul, whatever it is, might be mindfulness, meditation, spirituality, religion. And my professor, Richard Mulika, who's the head of the Harvard program in refugee trauma, he said storytelling is a verbal meditation. So just sharing our story can be very healing. So that's one thing that I'm very, big fan of. And there are like tips. We can maybe use one of them today, which is if you feel that you are going through burnout and compassion fatigue and toxic stress, maybe remember the 5R. 5R you can do for self-compassion. The first R, recognize that you need a break. So first thing is a recognition, and then request a break or actually demand one. If they don't want to give you a break, say, I part of protecting my sanity is asserting my boundaries. So I need to make sure that my boundaries are respected, and then actually relax during your break, because many people, Yvonne, they actually engage in stressful things when they take a break. They go to their social media and they watch things, updates on everything around them. So if you are on your break, make sure that you enjoy your break by taking care of yourself, and then realize your priorities. Maybe not everything on your plate have to be done today. If you have lots of things on your plate, prioritize, downsize, minimize, and delegate. It's okay. I mean, you don't have to do everything on your own. And the last thing, you can re-engage more refreshed and recentered, and be more available for the people that you care for.
Gosh, that's so useful and so powerful. I'm sure that lots of people will really find that such a sort of helpful tool. And you're right. I think we're just, there's just such a strong tendency in us to feel like we have to do everything now, and we have to. I mean, you mentioned social media, but I'm sure I'm not alone in feeling as though it's not just that I go on social media to check what's happening in the world or to catch up. It often feels like an obligation, that I'm part of various groups, and if I don't join in or show my face or tell everybody what I've been up to, that somehow I'm sort of I'm doing something wrong. And then again, there's this feeling of guilt coming up. Do you think social media has actually, has there been a toll on our mental health as a result of social media? And is that something you've noticed?
Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, many times social media is anything but social. Many times it is almost antisocial, and I see our children comparing, themselves to all these, people on social media that have the perfect body and the perfect life, and who have a better selfie than they are today, and their, you know, their friends might want to unfriend them if you don't like or comment on a status. And all of these pressures I did not live with as a child, so I feel privileged that way. But it's an unfair added pressure on our children. And
Mm,
given that now they are, behind a screen for long, long hours every day because of online schooling, we
mm,
really need to have compassion towards our children and not see them or see the internet as the enemy, but
mm.
model healthy way of how to use the cyberspace.
And what is the modern healthy way to use the cyberspace, in your opinion?
I mean, I, me and my wife, we do things different. She runs an organization for refugees, and she has more than 100 families under her care. So she has like 600 people that she need to take care of. And my approach is, she does everything for the refugees, like immigration, interpretation, transportation, whatever it is. I do the psychosocial aspects, so I have the easy part, if you like. And she does like 90% of the work. But then I say at 9 p.m., I'm going to switch off my cell phone because if there is an emergency, there's an emergency room. You call
Mm,
911, or you can call the emergency number, or go to the nearest crisis team. Or there are other ways. I cannot be on call 24/7 every single day of the year. She tends to want to be on call the whole time. So I
mm,
will wake up at 2 and 3 in the morning, and she's answering phone and replying to text. And I think that's why she's having more burnout and compassion fatigue
mm,
more than I do. So
mm,
one way of being healthy, engaging the social media, is to really use it for specific goals and maybe for a specific amount of time. And she has more than 1,000 friends on Facebook. I have only 9 friends who are my siblings. My dad does not use the internet, and my mom died in 2016. So I only have my siblings on my Facebook page. And that's how I keep updated on what happens in my home country.
mm.
And then, I, I think if you check your social media and email maybe twice a day, just when you come from work and before you go to sleep, that's more than enough. But our fear of missing out is a
Mm,
syndrome that's causing lots of anxiety.
it's true. And it's a deep fear. And I'm sure it's not really helping anyone or adding hugely in a beneficial way to anything. But yet we still feel compelled to do it. I wanted to ask you, we're sort of coming to the end of the conversation now. One of the things I wanted to ask you was about third culture kids. And this is partly because I have three third culture kids of my own. And I'm sure that lots of people will be in a similar situation. People who are living in a different country to the home country of their parents. Do you think you could explain to us what third culture kids are, and also what parents can do to help sort of minimize the stress or even the trauma that could be felt by the children and the family as a whole when they find themselves in a new and different culture?
Yeah, thank you. I mean, this is a topic that's very near and dear to my heart because, my trauma story seems to be a little you know, graphic when it comes to these encounters that my children have with hate and racism and discrimination. My girls, they come from the Islamic faith, so they practice their religion. They wear the hijab or the Islamic, dress. And many times people will tell them, go back to your home country, or they tell them, things about terrorism that unfair for children to hear. And
Mm.
I think, sometimes they come and they share things that happen to them on the streets or at school or online. And we try to have an open door policy, and we tell them this is a safe house and they should feel safe coming to us. And they did that. They come 3 in the morning because they had a nightmare, or which I
Mm.
think it's extremely unfortunate. Our children go through this because they look different or they have a different background. But when they go to Libya, for example, they did not feel that they belong there.
Mm.
Uh, they are here in the United States. They don't feel that they are 100% welcomed here either. So
Mm.
the third culture children need to have lots of self-love, self-compassion. We need to work on their self-worth, make sure their identity is very solid. So as a family, that we tell them that they are loved unconditionally, that they should be proud of every aspect of who they are, their skin color, their accent, their religion, the way they dress, their skin color. Doesn't matter what it is. They are loved this way because this is why God chose to create them, and this is how God chose to create them. And if somebody doesn't like something about me, that's a reflection of who they are. It doesn't really bother me. If something they think is wrong with me, I love myself and I try to insert that self love in my children. But it takes lots of discipline. In the beginning, it was very difficult coming to America, and I came here in 2002, so it was 5 months after September 11, and it was
Gosh,
very difficult time to
difficult.
live in America. So every time I hear there is a terrorist attack, I would say, "Oh my God, not another Muslim." So I had that internalized racism, but I
Mm.
don't do that anymore because I'm more comfortable sharing my trauma story and taking the podium to write my own narrative. So we need to give each other spaces so we can talk about our story in a way that makes meaning to us. And I tell my story, not a story that was dictated on me.
Oh, thank you so much for sharing all of that so openly and honestly. It's very moving to hear about your experience and really to get a sense of what it must be like for your girls to be in America and then also feeling a bit disconnected from America and similarly feeling that way when they go back to Libya. Um,
But
my
remember, remember, not everything is bad. There are
Mm,
very, very kind people that you need to associate yourself with. Like
mm,
after the New Zealand mosque shooting,
mm,
if you remember, there are 51 people who were killed,
mhm,
during a Friday prayer. Um, One of my Jewish colleagues, I have never met him before. He reached out by phone. He said, Omar, can we meet over coffee? And he told me that that day he wanted to just listen to my voice and hear my story and have safe space for my emotions. So that was everything that I needed that day, that minute or that moment of tenderness, that
mm.
a total stranger decided to reach out, and that made a difference. So there are many beautiful things that happen on a daily basis, and that's why I try to focus on the positive and on the beauty of the human spirit.
Absolutely. That is so beautiful and so true. And again, that's what I'm trying to do with the tenderness revolution. And one of the things that I am fascinated by is this sense of clinging to difference. And why is it that humanity can't seem to get past this sense of fear, I think, of difference? I believe that if we can somehow dissolve a fear of difference and try and replace it with curiosity, then I think so many of the world's biggest problems really would be at least, if not solved, lessened. What is it about difference that humans find so frightening, and how can we get over this?
Yeah, I mean, it's a big topic that, many times we have learned that if somebody is different, that means they are threatening to our own existence. If somebody comes to my home country as a refugee or asylum seeker, maybe they are here to take over my religion or my culture or my resources or our jobs or social welfare system, whatever it is. So there is that self threat, that I'm afraid that my own type, my own group, my in group kind of mentality is gonna basically be extinct or no longer exist because somebody else is coming, which is very interesting. I think if we collaborate rather than compete, we will live in a better world. I think looking at each other with not only curiosity, which I love the 3 C's that came up with, living with curiosity, but also with courage and compassion. And you are exactly embodying that with your family, living, in Botswana, living behind family and loved ones in the United Kingdom. But remember, I mean, not everybody is as brave and courageous as you are. It takes very large amount of self-discipline to be able to reach out to somebody else. And remember, like if you reach out to someone and invite them to the table, and even if they are at the table, you reach out to them and get to know them. If they are not at the table, you ask why they were not invited in the first place. If somebody new moved to my neighborhood, I'll be the first one to reach out. That's how we find that small moments of tenderness and beauty in each other.
Yes, absolutely. Oh, I love that example of reaching out to someone. And that brings me to my final question, which is actually about the 3 C's. And it's about the fact that this quality of tenderness for ourselves and others is embodied in these 3 C's because they enable us to fully see the truth about the way things are. And for me, courage, curiosity, and compassion embody that. And I wanted to ask you, if you had to choose one of these qualities that means the most to you in your life, which would you choose and why?
They're very difficult to choose because all of them are like fundamentally important. I would say compassion, just because it's the memory of my mom. So if you know my mom, she is somebody who will stop by families that lost loved ones, or families who their loved one is in the hospital. And these are total strangers. She just goes and visits random people. And I said, Mom, why are you doing that? She said, maybe I don't know them, but I know that they are in pain. And maybe just showing up, maybe I can take away some of their pain and suffering. So I would love to live by her example. She told me the last thing I heard from her, she said, if you cannot be somebody's source of joy and delight, don't be the source of their pain and distress. So compassion will, I think, win because of my mom's memory.
Oh my goodness, Omar, what a beautiful story to end on. And what an incredible woman she sounds like. And she has obviously had such a profound impact on you. And you are living on in the work that you do. You are carrying that kindness and compassion through and spreading it in the world. I really have really enjoyed our conversation today, and I can't tell you how much I appreciate you taking the time to talk to me for this podcast.
Thank you
Thank you
very
so
much. It's
much.
been my honor. Thank you.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the Tenderness Revolution. I hope you come back for more, because my aim with this podcast is to help us become more aware of these moments of kindness and compassion and how they shape our lives, and enable us to feel more connected to the world around us.